All right, it's 3:01. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I realize some people are just logging in now, and we are happy to have you as soon as you're able to get in. My name is Jill Nogaris, and I am the English coordinator at the Virginia Department of Education. And I am thrilled that you could log in and join us this afternoon as we explore assessment supports for 2021 for end of course reading. And before I move any further, I just want to share I do have a couple of colleagues on the line with me today. This is a collaboration between the English Instruction Office and the English Assessment end of the office. So on the line with me today, I do have from the Department of Learning, I have Colleen Cassada, our middle school English specialist, and Carmen Keurig, our elementary English and reading specialists. They will be monitoring the chat today to answer your instructional questions. And on my assessment side, we have Lauren Zielinski, who will be facilitating this session with me. And then joining her today, we have Catherine Ringley, Chris Tessera, and Melody Bushley, who will all be monitoring the chat for your assessment questions. So in keeping with that, we are using the chat feature today. We are going to ask that if you think of questions that you want to ask as we are going through this presentation, that you kindly switch in the drop-down menu your comment to all attendees. I'm sure that your question would benefit several others that are on the line. So if you switch it to all attendees and we reply to all attendees, then everyone benefits from the knowledge. So if you could, please use that. I love that some of you are putting in the chat where you're from. That's really exciting. I also see a couple of familiar names who have joined us on this journey for every single one of our sessions. And wow, I wish we had a prize. We need to find a prize for those few but faithful. This is our last session in this assessment series. However, we have been recording and posting all of the professional development we have offered for our assessment support series and then other comprehensive literacy webinars. So those are all posted on the DOE page, which we'll show you how to access later. Just know that this is also being recorded and will be posted along with the material so that you will have access to everything we talk about today. But you can also go into other grade level presentations to kind of see what information is available there as well. All right, so to get started, I kind of want to quickly explain kind of how we got where we are. As you all understand, in March of 2020, Governor Northam closed the Virginia schools in an emergency school shutdown. And as a result, we missed 10 weeks of instruction, unless students were sitting in your classes, high school credit classes, still moved forward with some new instruction. But we are also very much aware of the fact that we did not reach all of our students during that closure, whether that was because of home life, work life, school life, access to internet, whatever the case may be. Not all of our students continued on this journey with us. So we kind of need to be mindful and considerate of that as we're moving forward with this 2020-2021 school year. In June, Governor Northam did announce a phased reopening plan for Virginia schools, and we are in a phase of that plan right now. To support that, our Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. Lane, along with other members of the Virginia Department of Education, provided a guidance document called Recover, Redesign, Restart 2020, which is linked here. And so the difference between what happened in March and where we find ourselves now is that technically speaking, schools were closed for the last quarter of the 1920 school year. Whereas now, even though we may not be at school in person, we are open in the sense that we are instructing students and they are in new grade levels, and we are moving forward with a various hybrid of approaches, whether that's completely virtual or hybrid or in person, whatever your specific school division is doing. So while many of us find ourselves in a situation where we are offering instruction over the computer as we did last year, we are in a different situation in that last year we were closed, and as a result, SOL tests were canceled, and USED provided a waiver so that we would not be held accountable for those assessments. However, that has not happened for this year, And we do not anticipate that that will happen this year. So we are moving forward with the understanding that in spring of 2021, schools will take SOL assessments. And it is important for this group of people because our end of course reading SOL test will happen, and it will be based on the 2017 English Standards of Learning. So that was supposed to happen last year, and that was going to be our first year assessing the new standards of learning, but with the school closures, it did not. So we don't have that data, obviously, to share with you to show you where students struggled and what we could do to help them instructionally. So instead, we have put together this presentation to kind of support those standards of learning, especially with this idea of learning loss and learning recovery as we're moving forward this year in anticipation of the new assessments. So in that Recover, Redesign, Restart document, there's a lot of talk about authentic learning experiences and what authentic learning looks like and what we can be offering our students to bridge skill gaps, enhance their critical thinking, increase engagement, which I know is so difficult. I see many wins on social media when my teacher friends are talking about kids turning on their cameras and finally making eye contact, and just how exciting that is because we all miss being with our students. But thinking about how we motivate students and how we boost that retention of information, especially if we are teaching kind of like we are through this webinar in a computer situation. So just thinking about authentic learning and what that could look like in the variety of situations you are in. So we're hopeful that some of what you see here will kind of blend in with that. So please understand that this presentation was built to support the instruction of the 2017 standards. All right, it was to provide specific examples of the content and the progression of the reading skills as we've moved and over to the 2017 standards. Just to provide some additional background, as you know, reading has become a focus of Dr. Lane's, and as part of his initiative last fall, members of the Office of Student Assessment and the Office of Humanities English Office collaborated together to interview schools around the Commonwealth, elementary, middle, and high school, schools who had seen gains in their SOL reading scores, and talk to them and find out what it was they were doing, what was working for them, what did they find out, and what best practices could they share. So a lot of what you see here is based off of that, but we have also included a link to that presentation if you're interested in seeing that. So that information will be there. We are going to talk about question starters that align with the skills and the content that are in the 2017 English Standards of Learning and how you might get at a discussion with students about specific skills and content, but those questions are not meant to specifically mimic SOL test questions. All right, they're intended to provide educators with insight as to how to have conversations about some of these newer standards and more rigorous standards. So we also want to remind you that we want to keep the content of this presentation in perspective. This is not to change your teaching and have you just follow what we've put here. This is supposed to be supplemental information that can support you in what you are already doing. So your instructional focus needs to remain on the standards as a whole. And I do want to take a moment right now to point out something that we did here, and it was to organize this presentation. And I don't want anyone to have the idea that we are advocating for the teaching of skills in isolation, because we are by no means advocating for teaching the skills in isolation. What we are going to do is walk you through a 4-step process. And part of our process is to pick a rich, authentic text that then you could use for some deeper analysis. And as a result, we have picked out attributes and features from that text that we felt were rich enough to explore and have discussion on. Could we go through a text and find a random fact and opinion and ask a question about it? Sure. But what we're trying to do is find rich opportunities where the learning can happen naturally because there's so much of it available in the text. So what we have done is we have honed in on a couple of skills that present themselves naturally in the text. And then we're going to provide you with some scaffolded questions at how you might hold a discussion about those skills. Not because we would ever be in a situation where we take a passage and we only hone in on one skill and ask kids 12 questions on cause and effect. We would never advocate for that. However, we are providing you with a scaffold to show a progression of skills and meet your students where they are and demonstrate how to do it with a sample text. You obviously would bring in some of your own background information and assessment questions or discussion questions based on what else you see in the text. We're just using this as an example for organization. But something I really, I harp on this anywhere I go, is that we really need to move away from just looking at the standards or just looking at, say, the blueprint. I know those are both extremely important tools, but they only go so far. The blueprint will give us the standard that is measured in the assessment. However, it is in the curriculum framework that you truly get a full comprehensive understanding of what it means to perform at the level of that standard. And not only that, it really shows you, and I'm sure I have a variety of 9th, 10th, and 11th grade teachers on here today, it really shows you where you fall in that progression of skills and why it is so incredibly important for you to teach the standard at your grade level so that students can be successful in the following year. That next year teacher is depending on you so much, so incredibly much. So it's really important that, especially this year, we are looking at the year before, especially if you consider that lost learning or the shutdown where we missed kids for 10 weeks and they may not have mastered something, and look about what they might have missed, what happened, what would have happened had they been in school, and how do I take those concepts and skills and fold it into the instruction that I know I'm responsible for now. And additionally, while we did have some students who we lost along the way during the shutdown, we also had plenty of students who did their own thing and got very far ahead, and in a lot of ways are beyond the grade level in which they sit. So in looking at the next grade level, not only to see where our students are going next, but also to support those students who are ready for more of a challenge. We need to be looking at the curriculum framework for that. So today, Lauren and I are going to take you through a 4-step process. Step 1 is going to be about selecting text and looking at grade level text. I want to harp on that idea. It is important instructionally, especially as the teachers are providing the text, to provide that grade level text, because we are teaching our students grade level skills, and we need to do that using grade level text, because if we are always using something that is 4 years below what our current grade level is, then our students may be doing very well with the skill, but then wouldn't be able to apply that same prowess to the grade level text because they might not be able to read and comprehend it. So even if they do understand the difference between fact and opinion, they may understand it at a 7th grade level, but can they do the same and demonstrate that understanding with that grade level text? So we do a disservice to our students if we are constantly teaching at a below grade level text. So we want to provide as many opportunities as possible to use grade level text, and then scaffold in and spiral in some of the more instructionally appropriate for each student's differentiated texts when they're doing more of their independent practice or small group work. Step 2, we're going to look at the content and progression of the standards that present themselves with the authentic texts that we have. Then we're going to look at those question starters to think about how we could use them before, during, and after instruction to kind of show you that alignment and progression, and then explore some additional instructional resources if you wanted to continue with the ideas presented with the annotated text we're providing. Like, how could you take that to the next step? So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, who is going to speak with you now about the selection of authentic text.
Hello, everybody. As Jill talked about, we are so excited to have you with us. We're excited if you have been with us for others before that you are wanting to hear some more information applied specifically to the end of course test and applied specifically to skills that we would hope to see within your classroom all the time. Jill mentioned that step one was indeed the focus on selecting authentic text. And this is really such a vital place to start because if that text isn't on grade level, as Jill talked about, it does make it really difficult to ensure students are able to apply and carry those different skills from text to text that they are reading. So to kind of start off this process, we really want to make sure that when you pick a text to read, pick up your pen, your pencil, your highlighter, however it is you might do it, and really just analyze that text to determine what skills are authentically placed into that reading passage. So then you are spiraling the skills, so you are meeting the needs of your students. The example Jill brought up before was great about how, sure, there could be, an example of another skill, like she talked about with fact and opinion. And we definitely want to bring that to light and talk to the students about it. But if that's not the primary skill or skills focused on, we don't want to force something for the sake of an example. Once you have really reviewed that text and highlighted those skills and found out what is there so you can have those teachable moments with your students, you then need to kind of set that purpose. Is this passage going to meet the needs of our students for things where they're showing they need those skills reviewed and they need those skills taught to them again because they just didn't quite get it the first time? Or is this an opportunity to continue to apply those skills across different examples of authentic text? Once you have determined what that identified purpose is, then you're going to go back in and say, okay, here I could ask these questions that are going to help guide the comprehension and guide conversation within our classroom. I'm going to provide this background information for them so it levels the playing field so anyone could access this text. And I'm going to really just figure out the best ways to support moving that authentic text into authentic learning for the students. If your purpose was to introduce new skills, but that passage was supporting more of a review of skills, that passage is still necessary. Just don't use it maybe in that moment and go ahead and use a different one and then circle back to it. Make sure that that on grade level text has great opportunities for spiraling those skills that your students are showing that they need. And maybe if you realize you're just going to use that text later, that's great. The more text opportunities and the more opportunities to bring students into that authentic text for authentic learning is only going to better support them. One way that we tried to support you all in what we mean by this, by guiding questions and how to spiral the skills and truly finding the skills that the text best supports. We are going to provide for you through this presentation an annotated Word document focusing on two nonfiction pieces. And within those annotations, we are going to provide things like guiding questions or provide opportunities for discussion to further support. Maybe the focus skill was author's purpose, but then how did that author's purpose lend itself to understanding what that author, is trying to teach or things of that nature? There are lots of ways that our skills help support each other. And so we tried to do that through the annotation. And as you can see here on your screen, this is just a screenshot of part of one of the texts that will be provided and posted after this presentation. So you could see that there's a lot at your fingertips, hopefully through these examples. And just a really quick note too, you will see that each annotation starts out with that heading of VITA program. Please know that these annotations were specifically written by us for you for these passages. And that VETA program is simply just an IT placeholder of the program we use as we wrote these annotations. So we didn't want anyone to worry about that, but we did also want you to see that these annotations really are going to help model that idea of setting your purpose, making sure that the appropriate skills are focused on, and that we don't just love and leave a skill, but that we continue to come back and spiral and scaffold it into our learning. So once you have determined that, we did go ahead and pick two different nonfiction passages for you. And to help support the 2017 standards, we did provide two technical texts as well. This first one, as you can see, is called Get the Job. And that in and of itself is able to be applied to so many different standards when it comes to preparing, for authentic, real world situations, and really just helping to support student learning. So within this technical text, there will be the annotated Word document as well. And while we are only highlighting 3 skills today and through this text, please remember those were the skills that were most highly and easily to be addressed throughout this document. So we did focus on author's purpose, author's claims, and synthesizing information. There are definitely, as you will see through the annotations, opportunity to have additional skills reviewed and discussed, but these were the ones that were truly there to really get into and dive deep with the students. And so from here, we have the pleasure of hearing from Jill again to talk about, once those skills have been determined and picked, where do you go next? You got to dive deep into those skills. So it's all yours, Jill.
Thank you, Lauren. And I'm glad that this slide is right here because I think I've already seen the question pop up through the chat. Just a reminder that the end of course blueprint, I'm going to read this so that it can't be, I can't mess it up. It says all SOL listed in the blueprint are eligible for inclusion on each version of an SOL test. Some reading skills are repeated across grades 9, 10, and 11. Those SOL should be taught across all grades and will be assessed at the highest appropriate standard. So I am hopeful that I have my 9th, 10th, and 11th grade teachers on here today, because all 3 levels are incredibly important to a student's success on the end of course reading SOL. I know those scores get tied to the teacher of record at the time, but those skills, in all reality, start in kindergarten, but those skills in terms of how they are assessed in high school do include and are tagged to 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. So in thinking of the skills that Lauren pointed out for the specific technical text, these were aligned to 11.5A, which reads, apply information from text to clarify understanding of concepts. Now, what I'd like you to see here is that we have also identified 9.5D and 10.5B as part of the building blocks to get to 11.5A. So as you see this, we're talking about an author's intended purpose for writing and the ability to identify the main idea. And then you see that spiral up in 10th grade for recognize an author's intended audience and purpose for writing. And then in 11th grade, it's a little bit more generic to apply information from texts to clarify understanding of concepts. And 11.5A, and what you'll see in a lot of the 11th grade standards, is that they are more umbrella standards. They cover and address everything that a student has already learned. So I kind of like to think about these as Matryoshka Russian nesting dolls. You know, those dolls that you have a big doll and you open it up and there's a smaller doll inside and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, what you have with your end of course reading SOL test is essentially a Russian nesting doll. And every doll that's inside is an earlier grade level standard of learning that really plays a role and an important piece of getting to that last level of 11.5A. So I think that something that I would consider here if I were using this text for instructional purposes is that if I am a ninth grade teacher and I am using this text, then I would hone in on that 9.5D as one of the primary standards that I'm using as I am using the text. And then the same obviously for 10.5B, and then 11.5A kind of becomes a grab bag. We can ask a little bit of everything because at this point, students have had experience and exposure with all of the standards of learning to this point. And at this point, they are very comfortable with the material that's in there. However, I do want to point you back to this idea that if I were to use these standards, I would certainly go back into the curriculum framework to think about what that might mean. So if I'm thinking about 9.5D and I'm talking about an author's intended purpose for writing and identifying the main idea, then under those essential understandings from the curriculum framework, I would know that a student needs to understand that an author's credentials and experiences contribute to his or her viewpoint, and that an author's viewpoint refers to a bias or subjectivity toward the subject, and that a viewpoint can be positive or negative. And I need to know all of those little things to truly understand the idea of an author's purpose. I need to be able to identify an author's position, and I've got to be able to identify and infer the main idea from a variety of complex informational texts. Those are skills that I need if I'm truly getting at this 9.5D. So while 9.5D is just said so nicely in a brief statement, I really need to look into that curriculum framework to get those specifics. And to add to that for 10.5D, I would also make sure from the curriculum framework that students are able to identify the different formats and purposes of informational and technical texts. All right. If I don't understand the formats and purposes of technical texts, then I'm not going to understand how that impacts the author's purpose for writing and who they were writing for. So there are all of these smaller skills here that support a student's overall understanding of this grade level SOL that's listed here that our students need experience with. So it's not enough to just look at that blueprint or just look at the grade level standard that's listed. We really need to truly understand and appreciate the other skills that are there to support that overall standard. And then again, in thinking about 11.5A, to add to that, we would need to understand some things. We would need to activate our background knowledge to understand handbooks and manuals. We'd need to analyze vocabulary and the ideas of informational texts from different disciplines to understand the concepts that are presented. And we also need to recognize the nonlinear, fragmented, and graphic elements that are found in informational and technical writing to be able to put all those pieces together, to know what we're looking at, to then be able to address that purpose and audience. So a lot of these are pieces that have to work together. So if there's one thing you take away today, I really want you to take the time to go beyond the blueprint and the standard, to look at that curriculum framework, to have that scaffolding to support students. This here is an example that I do want to point out. As you see, we only have 9th and 10th grade here. So what you might notice is that when you get I'm not even sure what they're called currently, but when you get your student data by question or performance by question, and it gives you a standard, you're going to see that sometimes the standards are tracked to a different grade level other than 11th grade, because we test them at the highest level that's appropriate for the question. So what you see here is identify a position and argument to be confirmed, disproved, or modified. And for 10.5G, you see analyze and synthesize information in order to solve problems, answer questions, and generate new knowledge. Well, if you're looking at this specific text, you're going to see that we are talking about claims and we are talking about positions and arguments. So that 9th grade standard that's listed there is really going to be supported within that text. But in In addition to that, and this is where, end of course gets a little cohesive in that it all kind of works together. You're going to talk about, again, thinking about the author's credentials and experiences and how that contributes to the position they're taking or the argument they're presenting, and how that might show a bias in their viewpoint. So a lot of these things work together. And then we're talking about the idea of analyzing and synthesizing information. We're going to, again, be thinking about the different formats and purposes of informational and technical texts and looking at that vocabulary and recognizing the structure and how authors use rhetoric and looking at essential details. So these are all things that work together. And that's kind of what's nice about our high school standards, is that when you're in a strand or you're in fiction or nonfiction or even writing, they all work together. So there's plenty of opportunities to really hone in on some of these skills. And then the last one that was brought up through the text is this idea of synthesizing information. And when you get to 11th grade, and I'm sure many of you have heard me say this before, we don't list everything out anymore, because in all reality, if we did that, the 11th and 12th grade standards would be 30 something pages long, because they encompass everything a student has ever learned. All right, so at 11th grade, we're going to generate and respond logically to literal, inferential, evaluative, synthesizing, and critical thinking questions about texts. That's broad, that's big, all right? But if we look at that and we kind of parse it down a little bit, and we're looking at 9th and 10th grade, 9th grade kind of gives us some scaffolding. We have analyze, organize, and synthesize information to solve problems, answer questions, complete a task, or create a product. And 10th grade encompasses all of that, but they also add in, in order to solve problems, answers questions, or generate new knowledge. All right, so it's just this idea of being able to critically think about a text that is in front of us. So this one kind of builds more naturally, where you can kind of see what the synthesis looks like as we move through. So if I was using this text with a group of 10th graders, this is the standard that I would hone in on, and this is how I would build it through the text. So I'm going to turn over to Lauren to talk about how we might then look at some sample question starters to get at these standards.
Thank you. I do want to take a moment here to reiterate something that was said earlier in the presentation by Jill, but it never hurts to hear it again. Please, please, please remember that, especially for such a step as we are about to go through, that this was simply an organizational tactic for how to ensure that these starters could be easily found, or so then you could have just an easy way to remember where to go. But in no way are we advocating for skills in isolation. Our desire is to see maybe using some of these question starters as your springboard for discussion to then bring in other skills, or to potentially even take one of these question starters from end of course or from 3rd through 8th grade and then tweak it to the language and the rigor of the standard that you're desiring to talk about with your students, because we need to talk about main idea and end of course, but we have to talk about that back in elementary school too. So there are opportunities to take some of these question starters that we did put together in other presentations and then bring them and align them to the correct rigor and to the correct vocabulary necessary to meet the needs of your student. So keeping that in mind, looking here at the first skill that we did pull from the technical text, we have given you some starters to really just help focus on things like what the purpose was for this text. How does the development of the main idea support the author's purpose of this selection? Well, and maybe if you want to even tweak that, maybe it wasn't that the main idea supported the author's purpose. Maybe it was a text feature that supported the author's purpose. And so there's a lot of opportunity within these starters as well to really personalize them and to give that opportunity to drill down to what you need to focus on and ask throughout your discussion. You will see here also that we tried to give you different starters to support that rigor that as it goes up through the different grade levels. And we wanted to provide a writing opportunity because that is a great way to determine student understanding of a skill. I do also want to note here, as you can see in that writing example, we did specifically call out to include specific details from the selection to justify your answer. But please know that that is vital in any kind of discussion or any kind of question you're asking your students. You always want to direct them back to the text as support for what they are talking about with you. So please know that that is important to do. In these examples, for the SOL talking about author's claim, and even just that idea of problem solving and supporting questions that need to be answered, again, you can see the opportunity to personalize these questions to the specific text you're reading and to personalize them for the exact skill that you are desiring to focus on with your students. That's why we did things like insert information or insert location of the text. So then you can truly have these for what you need in that moment. Again, as you walk through these different question starters, you'll see that we gave you these opportunities to align the rigor to the standard. And we did, again, give you a writing opportunity for this question starter. So we included a not question as well, because sometimes that's just as important of a way to talk to your students about addressing things. And these questions definitely provide opportunity to be multiple choice, to be open-ended, to have that rich discussion to truly ensure comprehension and application of the skill. The last SOL that we had pulled out for this passage, again, we wanted to give you some questions to align whether you're a 9, 10, or 11, and to truly determine what information you needed to insert to make these question starters valuable to you. Looking at that second example, which of these would be the best source of information for maybe you want to ask about a speech or a report, and then specifically about a detail from that text that they just read. Because we want to be able to synthesize that information from the text they read and apply it someplace else. So again, these starters are there for you to use. Please go back to other grade level examples too, so then you can get ideas of how to support your students. And there's another writing example for you also. So at this point, we have selected our text, we've seen the progression, we've given you some question starters, whether they're for assessment, whether they're for discussion, however you feel fit to use them to support the spiraling and the review of skills. And now we really want to make sure that you could take these ideas and go beyond just this one text that we gave you, and to really support instruction beyond. So Jill's going to walk us through step 4, and we are going to be able to see where we go next.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. I also just want to take a moment really quickly and share again that if you joined us for any of the earlier assessment webinars, then you are aware of the other question stems that are in other grade levels. But the people who are joining us today might be interested specifically at looking at the 8th grade presentation, because that demonstrated how you might get at some of the paired passages and paired texts. So I encourage you to check those out. Also looking at the overview PowerPoint and presentation that we did on October 1st gives you the K-12 kind of scope of things, and it shows you which standards of learning will be addressed in each of the grade level presentations. And again, those were built off of the texts that were selected for those presentations. So some are repeated, some standards are never covered, because again, we're working on how to use a rich text that we have and get the most meat out of it. So, but again, if you want to look at a paired passage example, I highly encourage you to look at that 8th grade. There's also one in 5th grade, but I think 8th grade is far closer aligned to what we're trying to do here today. So, in thinking about instructional resources, we do have a page of, I want to say, close to 130 instructional plans that have been developed by Virginia teachers from all across the Commonwealth that are all written and aligned to the 2017 standards of learning. And the link is here. You will also get it at the end of this presentation, too. But this is kind of what the landing page looks like for those. And so when you get to the page, when you find it, this is what you see. And these are set up and listed. I believe right here's a good example. They're by strand. So we've got the communication multimodal, reading, writing, research. And then within each strand, they are broken down. Reading is broken down into fiction and nonfiction and vocabulary, and then again broken down by grade level bands. So this is just a screenshot of something that you might see here from one of the sections of it that gives you an idea of what instructional plans you might find. And I don't want you to limit yourself just to what's in the grades 9 through 12, because in all reality, you could use a lot of the material that and the structures that are demonstrated in the 6 through 8 plans, but just change the text that you're using and possibly the strategies that you're using with the text. So again, don't limit yourself. A lot of them dip down and dip up. So you're going to want to check those out. But I want you to see kind of how they're structured. So if you were to open one, this is just kind of a screenshot that we have here that shows the very beginning, and especially in high school, these are not lesson plans, but they are more of an overarching kind of unit structure. And some of them could take you as long as 2 weeks to do if you decided to do everything that was included in there. And we are not advocating that you necessarily need to do that, but you could take bits and pieces of what interests you and your students and what you need to cover and kind of make these yours. And that's what's so cool about them. So they are always going to be listed by a primary strand of our 4 strands. And then they're always going to integrate other strands and standards into there, because we do not teach skills in isolation. So you're going to see the pulled out essential understandings, like what we want our students to understand about this strand, and then what knowledge, skills, and processes they should gain from completing this instructional plan. In addition to that, they're broken out by language, academic language or background that might be important for students to have, especially if you have English language learners in your classrooms, or people who just need more, who don't have the specific background in the topic of the text you are going to be exploring. If it was on shipbuilding, most of us wouldn't know a lot of the terms that were in there. So it'll give you some of the specific vocabulary to support that growth so that your students can be successful. And then it really walks you through what the students are doing, what the teachers are doing. It always brings in writing connections and extensions. And then there's an entire section on modifications and differentiation opportunities. So I highly encourage you to look at those. One of the ones that's tagged to 11.5A is a sample of paired passages. It's called The Threat of Conformity and the Power of the Individual. And it's a really cool plan. I really encourage you to look at that one. They all have multiple texts that have been tied to them. Many of them link to Common Lit because of the copyright that is already handled out for us. So we're set with the copyright and we can use the material, but you don't have to use the pieces that are in there. What's so great about these plans is that you can look at the structures and what teachers are trying to do, and you can substitute in your own text. So if you have a text that you really love to use, look at this plan for the ideas that are in it, but use your text as the text instead of the model text. So I just kind of want to throw that in there, but this plan kind of explores opportunities for students to look at famous speeches and what it means to conform, and if individuality is more important. And it kind of grapples with and explores some of those questions. But it offers diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment opportunities. And it has some really great sentence starters and frames if you wanted to do a Socratic seminar with that. And there's the opportunity, if you're interested, to collaborate with your high school history counterparts, especially as we're looking at world leaders in history. whether that's world history or American history or Virginia history, and how we can thread these things together to support student understanding and their success with 11.5A. And what you'll see as you're going through these is that so many other standards are brought into this, and you can make this as big as you want. So just wanted to show you that we do have resources that get at that. There's another one that really gets at 11.5L, and the idea of critical reading of nonfiction. And again, created by Virginia teachers, but it does definitely helps you with the elements and structures of nonfiction, analyzing the use of rhetoric for both good and evil, and then finding examples of that in contemporary society. So applying that out, which I think, especially in this virtual environment, is a great opportunity for our students to use some current material that they have access to at home, where we may not have access to the anthologies we would use in a classroom. How can we use what we can find and still teach in a very authentic way what we want our students to learn? There's definitely some support there on analyzing nonfiction with some graphic organizers and some text that you could use, and the opportunities to analyze rhetorical devices and ethos, pathos, and logos, and how authors use those to use literary and rhetorical devices to create those. So it's definitely another extension piece that you could use that would support a lot of what you're trying to do. And again, while it does say 11.5L here, that does not mean that a ninth grade teacher could not use this. This is just where it was tagged, and it aligns with what we were showing you today. So none of them are specific just to one grade level only. They're all by bands, and you could adapt and modify for what works with your students. So I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren to discuss how you might use the additional text.
So as promised, we did provide you with 2 different pieces of authentic text to walk away from this presentation with. And the second text is, again, a technical text, which directly aligns with the 2017 standards, and it is called Lease Agreement for Room Use. And just like with the previous text that we just walked you through, we again annotated and looked through the text to find examples of authentic learning connected to the 2017 standards. While there are absolutely opportunities to fold in and talk about and scaffold other skills, the 3 that we chose to focus on that the text most lent itself to was that of vocabulary in context, characteristics of a technical text, and skimming text for information. So again, you can see that a lot of these are going to open themselves up to asking questions and having great, rich discussion on how these skills and several others are able to help support comprehension. So when you get that Word document after this presentation, when it's posted, you will be able to see how we specifically pulled out examples for you in those annotations. And now Jill's going to take us through that super vital step of seeing how these skills support each other across the grades.
Thank you, Lauren. This is one of my favorite standards right here, because as you can see in all 3 grade levels, it is the same. But if we were to look at the curriculum framework, we'll see some separated out nuances here. If we were looking at 9th grade, additionally, in the curriculum framework, it says recognize that words have nuances of meaning, including figurative, connotative, and technical, that help to determine the appropriate meaning. In 10th grade, we have that again, but we also add in understand that context and connotation help determine the meaning of text. And when we hit up into 11th grade, we have analyze the connotation of words with similar denotations, and then understand that word structure aids comprehension of unfamiliar and complex words. So we're kind of building off of these 3 standards to get to that 11th grade level. And I think I saw it kind of pop up in the chat earlier. So just wanted to remind everyone, especially if I have some new friends on the line today, at this point, you should all be aware that in the end of course reading blueprint for the 2017 standards, I mean, this goes for all of the reading blueprints, we now have 2 reporting categories, because our vocabulary questions are not going to be in isolation anymore because they are going to be tied to the text that's available on the test. So it will be tied to that passage. So I'm hopeful, I'm crossing my fingers that everybody on this is nodding their heads along with me in agreement that the vocabulary that you're using in your classrooms this year comes from the passages and texts that you're using instructionally in your class, because that's the most authentic way that we can give our students practice with using context, structure, and connotation to determine those meanings of words and phrases. So I think this is a wonderful move, a wonderful shift that we have made here. Instead of having a random list, random assessed words, and who knows if a student knows it, they're going to have that scaffolded support. So we as instructional leaders need to show them how they can use those supports to help them parse out the definitions of words. All right, our next one is analyzing technical writing for clarity. And to kind of build up to that, to scaffold, if you look at 9.5F, we have identify characteristics of expository, technical, and persuasive texts. And then 10.5D, compare and contrast informational text for intent and content. So we're looking at technical text, and there's no way that we can analyze it if we don't first know the characteristics of it. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. And then when we compare and contrast these kinds of texts, we're looking at the content and how they're set up and what they look like, and looking at, if we're looking at our curriculum framework, then we know that we're talking about the different formats and purposes of informational and technical text, and that vocabulary again, and the style, and how authors use rhetoric within those. And then thinking about that, analyzing at 11.5C, we're bringing back in that background knowledge that we have of everything we've learned in all the way through 10th grade, and that vocabulary that we know, and then recognizing the different elements found in informational and technical writing. So again, thinking of my Russian nesting dolls, all of these pieces inside really do support and prepare our students to be able to analyze that technical writing. And that is why my 9th and 10th grade friends on the line are so important to this mission. Thinking about 11.5D, which is to paraphrase and synthesize ideas within and between texts. This definitely is the highest level that we're getting here that would be on an assessed item. But if we're thinking about what that means, if we go back to 9.5H, we have the evaluate and the clarity and accuracy of information. We've got to know that it's correct and that it's real before we can actually synthesize the ideas that are in it. We need to know if it's valid and something we should be paying attention to. And then in 10.5C, once we know that we can find accurate information, how do we quickly skim those materials? What skills do we need to be able to skim materials, to have an overview, locate information so that I can synthesize those ideas, so that I know what I want to grapple with and what I want to spend time for? So if you're looking back in your curriculum framework, it does say, evaluate the clarity and accuracy of information found in informational texts, and make inferences and draw conclusions from complex informational text, and demonstrate comprehension and apply strategies to write about what is read. So all of that kind of works together. And then with the idea of skimming materials to locate information and kind of have a main idea of what's going on for our overview, we need to be able to identify the different formats and purposes of informational text, again, with the vocabulary, the style, being able to interpret and analyze information that's presented with the different text features that are available in our technical and informational texts, and then demonstrating our comprehension to write about what is read. So kind of putting these together and getting to that 11.5D, we're going to need to, thank you to the curriculum framework, it helps us understand that our students need to organize and synthesize information from paired text while maintaining the intended purpose of each, and identify how authors use rhetorical devices to create ethos, pathos, and logos. And then look at, how do we provide an objective summary of a text? And how do we compare and contrast how complex texts treat the same topic? So we have to be able to synthesize these ideas, but how do we get there? And it's from all of these pieces that we've been working on over the last couple of years. And then again, just that reminder that we always want to make sure that is there, you know, the blueprint and the standards that are included are repeated from across grades 9, 10, and 11, and they will need to be taught across all grades because they will be assessed at the highest appropriate standard depending on the item in the passage that's there. So it is important that our 9th, 10th, and 11th grade English teachers are working with all of these skills, because while I realize 9th and 10th grade may not be assessed, they are assessed. They are just assessed in junior year. And it is hard to be successful with those skills your junior year of high school if you don't have that foundational knowledge underneath. So Lauren is going to talk about the last set of sample question starters with you.
Thank you, Jill. Yes, so similar to what you saw for the first passage that we're providing you with, again, just for organizational purposes, we have grouped together several different question starters that could be used for 11.3B. Again, with the opportunities to personalize the starters as required from what you're reading, to make them multiple choice, to make them open-ended, and even to possibly interchange different skills as well to really make sure that you have the supports for what you're looking for. Again, we tried to provide a writing opportunity with each one of these different question starters to ensure that you were really meeting your students at the place where they needed you most. Looking at our next skill that we had, again, you'll see we're going to sometimes start off with some really basic questions to make sure and to determine what student knowledge and understanding is. And then once we know that they can identify the characteristics of those technical texts, or maybe it's a persuasive text, or maybe it's informational, depending upon what SOL you're focusing on. But then you can take your students to those next steps with higher rigor and ensuring that they're meeting the appropriate grade level standard, and they can take and apply and keep going. Again, we tried to provide some not and accept questions. Again, just to provide different ways to address the skill. And we left you with a writing opportunity as well to apply why the selection would be considered a technical text. If students can explain that with support, that is so wonderful. And looking at that last skill of 11.5D, again, we wanted to just give you these different starters so you could truly determine the best ways to approach conversations and assessments with your students, formative and summative, and just really, personalizing them how you needed them. So you will see that those are just there for you. And then Jill's going to walk us through one more time how to do step 4, going beyond these 2 texts that we gave you.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, and I'm just going to quickly talk about this vocabulary and author's tone plan that aligns with 11.3B. And really, if there's any takeaway you should have from this, is not even about specifically this plan. It's really just a push to go look at the other available plans, because especially as we are talking about, arguments and claims and persuasive writing and everything else, I don't want you to limit yourself, because so much of what we do in high school, since the reading and the writing go hand in hand, there's no way that you're teaching your students to write persuasively without showing them model texts of persuasive pieces. So I'm encouraging you to look at the plans that are posted even under the writing, because you're going to find model text that you could really teach authors' claims with, and look at those reading standards at the same time that you are using and, as a primary source, using the writing standards as the focus as your lesson, because they go hand in hand. And in all reality, our students should be confused as to what class they're sitting in. Are they reading, or are they writing, or are they doing both? Because our best readers are also our best writers, and they impact one another. So good writing helps you become a better reader because you're looking at that author's craft. And our students who are really good readers become really good writers because they have so much exposure to rich text. So please, 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 I know they're by strand, and that's just for an organizational structure, but take the time to go look at those plans, even if you're talking about reading standards and you are looking at the writing plans, because they all have sample model texts in them. But this specific one happens to be about vocabulary and author's tone. So it's talking about how the author's word choice affects the meaning of a passage, and it reveals the author's attitude or tone towards a subject. And then it goes through a lot of speeches and presidential speeches and what they might be arguing for or against, and what can we learn about the time and what people's viewpoints were and how they wrote it for their intended audience. And there's just a lot of structures in place there to kind of support that. But there's also, again, diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment opportunities there, and writing connections, which I think right now are really helpful, especially as we are looking at school through the lens of discussion boards and drop boxes and everything else. So if we're in a situation where we can't have a conversation with a student, probably the next best thing for us to know what's going on in their heads is to have them share with us in writing what they think. So I encourage you to look at those. And I know my time is essentially up, so I'm just going to run through these resources. Again, since we are two different offices collaborating on this, we host two different web pages on a greater website. So we've put everything together at the end of this presentation so that you can find it in a more efficient manner. So that first bullet there is going to be your landing page for English, and it's going to have everything you can imagine for English. You just want to check those out. And then of course the blueprints are there. And if there's one takeaway, I hope what you're getting out of this is to go beyond the blueprint and really look into the spiraled skills in that curriculum framework, thinking about the year before and what's coming next. We have the reading progression charts. They're orange now. So if you're using blue ones, throw them away. Those are 2010. We are done with that. Everyone should be teaching 2017 right now, because the 2017 standards are more rigorous. So even if you find that your students are taking the 2010 version of the reading SOL test, they're going to do just fine, because the 2017 standards are far more comprehensive and go beyond that. So your students will still be successful. So check out those orange progression charts. We also have the framework and the standards. You all don't have to worry about computer adaptive testing, but if you're just interested, there's information there so that you have an understanding. Maybe you're the parent of a student who takes a computer adaptive test. The assessment supports literacy webinar series pages there. Tomorrow, you all who are still here with us will be getting an email thanking you for your participation and providing you with your 1 credit hour for being with us. And in that will be a link to the assessment literacy webinar series, where you will find all of these materials posted. That is where you will get a copy of the recording, the PowerPoint presentation, and the annotated text. So you can expect that to see that link tomorrow. Again, we have SOL practice items in TestNav 8, TestNav 8 being the program that students actually take their assessment in. The new items that are there are aligned with the 2017 standards, but you're going to find that some of the concepts are repeated because our standards are quite similar to what they were in 2010 when it comes to some of those bigger concepts. So they might look a little familiar, but that's okay, because we're showing you that there's a lot of consistency there too. But in addition, it's really helpful for our students to have that practice with TestNav 8 so that they can look at the tools, the TEIs, learn how to cross out things, so that that is not a complicating factor on the day of the test. They can really just worry about their reading comprehension. The 2017 standards have been around since 2017, even though we're only testing on them for the first time here in 2020, 2021. So you'll see 2 years worth of presentations created by teachers from across the Commonwealth, presenting to you ideas and concepts and ways of instructing the 2017 standards. So I would definitely check those out. There's a link to all of the instructional plans, and probably the most current piece that you're looking for is Superintendent's Memo 249-20, which came out this fall, that provides the update on the new standards of learning tests for reading and history and social science, and shows that the fall tests, so anyone taking the fall assessments, if you're on a 4x4, would be under the 2010 standards of learning, but all reading assessments given in spring of 2021 and beyond for the next many, many years will be on the 2017 standards. So you can see where that information is if you'd like that current up-to-date info. And this is our contact information. We answer our own phones and our own email. So please reach out, because we love to support you and to support learning and to support students. So without further ado, I am going to end this so that you all can have your evenings to yourselves, but I appreciate you sticking with us. I hope you found this helpful, and please be in touch. Thank you.